Okay. Ani, today is Sunday, March 7th, 2021, and we're Zooming from different parts of the country. And so I thought that we would start by talking about where we come from and where we are today. So if one of you would like to start, that would be great. Do you want me to pick somebody? Jobena, go ahead.
So, hi, I'm Jobena Petonoquot from the Kitigan-Zibi Reservation. I'm Algonquin, and I've been really practicing art seriously for the past 3 years. And yeah, so it all started off when I won the residency at the Montreal Museum of Fine Art, and that's when my first solo exhibition came about, Rebellion of My Ancestors. So for me as an artist, I use beadwork as an act of storytelling because I don't speak Algonquin like many young people like myself. We don't really speak our language, but when I became an artist, I found it very empowering to be able to create artworks that people would understand and tell my familial history. And also because because we're all First Nations in this Zoom meeting, you can relate to colonialism and how it's affected our lives. And even though it happened a very long time ago, we still feel those remnants of colonialism and how it affects our identity. So I started off with telling the stories of my grandfather. My mother told me these stories, and she spoke about rebellion. Well, not she didn't actually say rebellion, but I felt like it was rebellious because my grandfather was a hunter and a trapper, and even though the colonial powers forbade it, like they kind of frowned upon living in the indigenous way, but he did it anyway, and he grew up towards the end of the Victorian era. And I think about my grandfather and how even till he couldn't he got too old to hunt and trap,
Uh-oh.
both Irish and Algonquin, and he taught us to be very proud of that. So I made a lot of beadworks that were in connection to colonialism and our ties to the land, our deep connection to the land, which I feel very connected to the land. But I also use make reference to the atrocities that the colonizers used Christianity to colonize us, and they used it just to fit their agenda. They took something good and used it for something bad. So in a lot of my beadworks, I indigenize everything that you'll see, like for example, the baptism dresses. It's a very delicate fabric, and I had ordered these antique baptism dresses, and they from eBay, because it's easy to get anything from eBay, and the fabric was so delicate, and I remember beading them and how long it took, even though the beading was very intricate, but I didn't completely bead the dresses, so it didn't take that long, but I felt like it was taking long because of the fabric, and it really created and established a dialogue of the difficulties and the relationships between the colonizers and First Nations people. And I thought, well, I've always been interested in the idea of funerary practices. So I decided, well, what does it mean? What does it mean when you bury somebody? And usually you're letting go, but you're not forgetting. So I thought it would be a really nice gesture, healing gesture to bury these dresses. And I buried them at a specific time. I buried them at sunset. And the amount of time is not that important. I think I dug them up like maybe a month later or something. And I thought, well, it created more meaning because I was letting them go, but I was unearthing them because we still need to educate non-natives that this history is theirs. It's not just our history. It just doesn't belong to us. They're part of it. So that's why I decided to bury them and then unearth them and have them shown in a gallery. And I think having them soiled and dirty really speaks to, like, dude, you take something pure and you make it dirty. It really speaks, it really creates so many different dialogues that people can see when they see the dresses in the gallery. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And you jumped ahead a little bit.
I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Teresa, do you want to talk about where you are today and sort of what's led you to meeting with us here today?
Sure. Dine ke dolchen on shansi no ke Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé shansi shna thielgai monsi shna wuna tsaijitsu monsi or yeah, actually I was right. Haha. Pizza nik tson dite nisu dite. Apologize, I'm still a learner. Yeah, my name is Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé. Obviously it's awkward because Lori and Jobena and I both know you, so I'm trying to like talk to an audience that isn't there. But my name is Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé. My Apertanana name is Dolchet Nelna. I'm a member of White River First Nation of Beaver Creek, Yukon, but I'm currently right now in Lekwungen Territory, which is Victoria, BC. And yeah, I don't know how to follow up to that. That's it for right now. What was the other question, Lori?
Let me just sort of start as well, and I'll you know, you're right. We all three of us know each other really well now, and so we're just going to riff on all of this and just present it to the world, and people will know how comfortable we are with one another. I'm Lori Beavis, and I was born and raised in Peterborough, Ontario, and I feel like I grew up all over the territory that includes Nugojawannong, which is Peterborough, the Mississauga Anishinaabe name for Peterborough. And as a kid, I was sort of, you know, at Hiawatha and on Rice Lake, at Young's Point, Burley Falls, Kawartha Lake, so all different parts of the territory. My father's family is Irish, and they came to Canada in 1823, and which is an interesting date because in 1880, 1818, sorry, pardon me, my maternal family, who are Mississauga from the Rice Lake area, from that territory, had signed the first treaty, which was called the Rice Lake Purchase. And that purchase took a huge swath, basically from Lake Ontario up through the Haliburtons and towards Algonquin. And the reason for it was for Irish, British, Welsh settlers to start to come into the territory and to start to farm and settle that land. And today I'm a visitor living and working on Ganakahaka territory, Tujage, also called Moniang in the Anishinaabe language, in Anishinaabe-Moan. And at the present time, it's also called Montreal. And one of the things that I've been doing for the last number of years as a curator is I've been very interested in the way that stories and family stories enter into the way that we work and operate in our lives and in our work as artists and art workers. And And so it, this seemed a perfect example. And Jobena, you've just done a wonderful précis of everything, everything that's based in the work that you're doing and why you're doing it. And I feel that that's really strongly comes out, because I think that, so much of what we do is based in family story and family history. And it's a way to sort of bring forward and to teach, and to teach people who may not know Indigenous stories, and the intricacies of all of that, to bring it forward, and then to have an exhibition of beadwork and related work to the beading, is, I think, just really quite wonderful. And so this exhibition is a sort of placeholder for a physical exhibition, because during the pandemic, we've just decided that we would be very happy to just actually get something up online at Artspace. And so we're very, very happy that that's happened. So, so thank you both for being here today. And I've got a few questions that we can talk, sort of use the starting point of Held in the Hand, Beading and Family History as Art Practice in the work of Jobena Petonoquot and Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé. So Jobena talked a little bit about the connections that she feels exist between her beading practice and telling family stories and histories. And so maybe, Teresa, would you like to talk a little bit about the connections that you see that are there, and why you're sort of, because you've come to a new body of work with the work that we're showing at Artspace too, which is really interesting. So if you want to speak to that, that would be great.
Sure. I guess I can start a little bit at the beginning. I was taught to bead by my grandma when I was 8. She kind of, she sat me down, gave me a bucket of beads, which I call bead soup, or most beaders call bead soup. And I just, I watched her, and then I just copied and tried to do beading. I didn't pursue it until I went to university, and it helped relieve stress and anxiety from post-secondary education or being away from family. It was the first time I was away from my mom, like, ever. So, beading helped me with that. And then I just kind of escalated from there, and I just kept it as my primary medium into my art career. Beading is definitely a huge part of my connection to my community. It's an act of culture when I'm beading and when I'm creating work. The particular pieces that I have for this exhibition obviously are works in progress because I don't bead that fast. But it took me a really long time, because we've been having this conversation of this exhibition for over a year now in the planning process. And I had another exhibition doing the same thing because we got postponed because of COVID. And it made me, COVID-19, the pandemic, and I lost 2 grandparents and stuff like that in 2020. So, a lot of just grief, grief of work, grief of the loss of family, grief in the sense of we're on Zoom. I can't see you in person, those kind of things. I struggled a lot with creativity, and it wasn't until a few months ago that I really, there was a spark that came into my head, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do for this exhibition. And it was all related. Actually, it came from our conversations that we've been having over the last year or so, plus seeing what Jobena was coming out with for this exhibition. It started to make me feel like I wanted to connect somehow, and I wanted to connect through talking about family and beadwork and things like that. Talking about family through beadwork. And so the pillows are symbolisms and representative of one family member. So each pillow is for one family member, and I hope that it'll continue to grow until I have so many pillows that it'll just be overwhelming. So that's yeah.
That's great. Jobena, tell us a little bit about how you came to start having a bead practice.
Well,
did you
I
start as a child?
Slightly in high school. I we did have Algonquin classes in high school, and we did do a bit of beadwork, but I guess I don't know, I had trouble listening, so I only did the beadwork the way I wanted to do it. And we were making moccasins, and the teacher saw the way I did them and she tore them up. And this was a native teacher that did this to me. And my friends were like, why did she do that to you? And I guess I had lost interest in beadwork at that time because I was a typical teenager. So I only started beading when I was 25. So I remember my stepdad's grandmother, who's Naskapi. Well, she only spoke Naskapi, but she always said this, and my dad translated, and he said, "Don't try, just do it." So I just started beading, and I just I was inspired by a lot of things that were around me, things that I saw in nature, maybe a beautiful pattern in lace that I might have seen. I'd be like, oh, that could be a really pretty beadwork. So that's how I didn't have that background where you have those very sweet stories like what you typically hear. Oh, my grandmother taught me, my auntie taught me. Well, my grandmother she had 16 children, so I don't think she had time to do any kind of beadwork. So I whenever I want to do something, I don't wait, because if you wait, you're never going to accomplish anything. So it was all trial and error. Even making the first time I made moccasins, I had taken apart an old pair that I had lying around that had holes in it. So I was like, I'll just take them apart and I'll trace the pattern. And I guess they were misshapen, so they were very round. So the first time I made moccasins, it looked like I was making moccasins for a bear, because I didn't I didn't understand, because I'm like, then I looked at my foot, I'm like, your toes are kind of slanted, right? Like they're kind of diagonal. So when you're cutting the pattern, you just like cut it kind of diagonally. And then when you put it together, it looks more like moccasin. Yeah, so I didn't learn any traditional patterns, but what I did learn, well, I started drawing even when I was in university. I didn't know I could draw. So I had to draw to make maquettes for different projects. So a lot of my beadwork patterns, they're very original because I designed them myself, which isn't typical. Typically, you're going to learn the traditional patterns, but sometimes I look at my work and it looks kind of Ojibwe, which I am a little bit Ojibwe, Algonquin, Ojibwe, Potawatomi. I'm like basically Algonquin, because those are part of the Algonquin tribes anyway. And my work, I use a lot of scalloped edge in my work, and I guess I had done that intuitively. So in my own way, I guess it was in my spirit, it was in my heart to do beadwork, because I was doing things that I didn't mean to do, and they turned out to look Ojibwe. And I thought that was really interesting when I was looking at old archival photos of beadwork. I was like, wow, I'm like, I just did that without even really thinking about it. So for me, my journey with beadwork is a little bit different, and I wish I had started as a child, but it didn't turn out that way. But everybody has their own path and their own unconventional way about learning your traditions and keeping your traditions. So that's how I learned.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. And do you both sort of think about the way that the aesthetic, the way that the beads catch, the intensity of the color often, and the way that they catch the light and things like that. I just often think that the artist Barry Ace talks about the Anishinaabe Moan word for bead is, and I'm not going to remember what it is exactly, but it means spirit berry, spirit bead, yeah, spirit
Wow.
berry. So it's, and so he talks about how they radiate, and they sort of, and you know, a lot of his work relates to sort of communication and that sort of thing as well. So that's a vast generalization of his work, but still, it's that really, the sort of, there's sort of the aesthetic of the the materials, and then the telling of the stories, and just, I think that just all sort of makes it, you know, comes together and makes it all very, very rich. And do you have a sort of aesthetic experience with the beads when you're doing it? Do you think about that? Certainly, I think it's evident in the images of the work that we've got here in the show. So,
Well, sometimes I start off with a concept, but as the beadwork progresses, the story kind of gets more clearer and it changes. So my ideas change a little. So I guess it's kind of like almost like a spiritual feeling when I'm doing beadwork and creating something where something's guiding me. Like maybe it's my ancestors guiding me, and I just know what to do when I'm doing it. But usually when I have an idea for beadwork, it comes from a dream, or it came from a vision that I suddenly had, and I just draw it. And then when I start to work on the project, then it evolves and it becomes something else as I'm working with the materials. And that's my process when I'm doing beadwork.
how about you, Teresa? Do you have a sort of aesthetic response to the materials, and then does that sort of enter into the way that you use them and tell the stories and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. When I started beading and my grandma gave me beads, they were all purples and blues and pinks because she loves purple. So that was kind of like the colors that I was used to thinking about when I was thinking about beadwork. It was always purples and pinks and things like that. And I mean, the benefit of beads is there's so many colors, and I love color. And you know, like that's kind of why I'm super attracted to. I don't use any antique beads. That's something that I've never done before. It's not that I'm opposed to it, it's just I've never had access to them. But yeah, so like contemporary seed beads are kind of my go-to. And they just come in a range of colors, and you start to get used to, I mean, like when you talk about aesthetic, I also think about like just the practicality of the bead. You know, there's certain types of beads that have a coating on them that will fade away, you know, within a couple months. And you have to learn about your material. You have to learn what type of bead are you going to use. There's completely different brands and different sizes and different needs and uses for all of them. So you kind of just, you get acquainted to them, and you know exactly what you like, and you keep going back to the same ones. So seed beads are like just classic is what I like to use for these pieces that I made. I'm looking at them right now. Like the pillow that I made for myself. All of the pillows have the names of myself, my mom, and my grandma on them. And then hopefully there'll be more in the future. And those are all beaded in galvanized gold beads. So they're metal beads. And then the beadwork that I did for myself in this piece, like these are not colors that I would have chosen for myself. But I had the idea of representing moss. And so I wanted my pillow to be the first one to experiment with beading moss. And then I moved on to different things like adding colors. And like this one for my mom, she really wanted yellow in it. So I started to adapt my beadwork to what my grandma and my mom wanted to see on there. But yeah, green and things like that, it's very new to me. I'm used to very bright colors when I'm beading and experimenting.
And can you tell us about the process of the work that you're creating for this exhibition, or you've created for this exhibition? For example, Teresa, the backstrap sinew, which I didn't really know very much about, and I kind of was pleased to have the opportunity to do a little bit of research and find out what it was and where you find it, and that was really, it was really great. And I sort of went into a whole, you know how when you get onto the internet, sometimes you just go into a whole other territory that you've never been before. So I was like with this primitive hunter guy who was like giving me all this information and everything. It was really quite interesting. And so you know, to think about that part of the moose that it comes from and the process that you go through to get the threads of sinew, it's like, you know, it's this massive animal, and then you end up with these very fine strands. And I think that's quite interesting. And so I don't know if you can talk about your process and, you know, whether or not you've actually gotten to the point of, have you gone out moose hunting, and how did you sort of move forward in, you know, harvesting the moose? I think you had help from your mom and her partner, and then cutting and smoking the backstrap as part of your practice. And then also, I guess, sort of that, and I've got a couple more questions if you just sort of want to just sort of start with that first one about the sort of the process of harvesting.
Sure. I have some right here to show you. I did not use the backstrap in the pieces, or at least not yet. It is not easy to bead with this. There it is.
Wow.
That is the backstrap,
So
at
really,
least the chunk of it.
It does look like it. Jobena and I were talking about it before, and we said it does look like a bit like a piece of bacon.
That's what because from
it doesn't
far
smell
away,
like it though.
No.
How does it smell?
It kind of smells like dry moose meat, but it's like something that you couldn't eat. Like you can see the fibers in it. Like you can actually see the strips of what it's supposed to be. So it's not anything that you would eat because you know, it gets stuck in your teeth and stuff like that. It's too fibrous. But yeah, so it was something that my grandma showed me when I was young. I remember her, you know, making the sinew, making this thread out of the sinew, and it, like with my MFA at Concordia. So I'll just be clear, I didn't have a background in like I wasn't trained in art, like formally trained or Western education trained in art. So this is my first time experiencing art school when I'm at Concordia for my MFA. And a big part of it is the processing and developing of natural materials. So I've been using a lot of quills lately. I've been using feathers, fur, just a bunch of different things. What else? Hair, moose hair, porcupine hair, horse hair. So now it's moose backstrap sinew. And yeah, I've processed it. I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail because I'm still working that out with my grandma. Like Jobena said earlier, you know, talking about kind of like traditional patterns. Yes, I totally learned some traditional patterns, and I had a talk with my grandma before I started making art formally and presenting myself as an artist. I asked her what I could sell or what I could present, and we had a good conversation that led to us deciding that if I was going to make a piece of work for a potlatch, that was the work that I would not sell. So things like moccasins, gloves, necklaces, things that would relate to culturally significant items, I don't sell to the public. And so all of the work that I ever present is completely contemporary. It's all out of my own head. It has nothing to do with traditional patterns, just to keep those things separate. So I'm not, yeah, that's just the community that I come from. Needs those things separate. So the same thing applies to the processing of the sinew. It's really hard for me to decide and be comfortable with presenting the process to people that are non-Indigenous. It's one thing if I'm teaching somebody that's Indigenous, but the other thing is I've already had it online recently of people asking me to teach them. And I want to be clear, I'm still learning. Like that's a big part, is as soon as you're engaging with, hide tanning and stuff like that, people instantly just want to know everything about it. And it's kind of like, well, I'm still learning it. Like I'm still learning how to make these threads. So I'm still working through that. But yeah, my mom and her partner actually harvested the backstrap for me. I wasn't in my community when it happened. And it was funny because they didn't know what they were looking for. And I didn't know what they were looking for. I just knew it was on the back. Yes. Like you said, it's on the side of the spine, and it's supposed to be fibrous. So my mom called me while she was out in the woods cutting the moose. And she actually, she was there and she was asking me, does this sound right? Does this look right? Sending me photos and stuff like that. And so that's how we harvested it.
by cell phone.
None of us knew what we were looking for, and it was by cell phone. And luckily, one of my uncles went out there to help them cut up the moose, and he said, "Oh, this is the backstrap sinew. This is what women would use back in the day and make thread from." And something that made me really proud was my mom said, "Well, Teresa is going to do that. Teresa's doing it now." And that was really important to me because it was something that, this is if you talk about backstrap sinew, you think about in the old ways, or the old days, and in the old ways and stuff like that. Like, it's just always kind of like putting us in the past of like, that was something those grandmas or our great grandmas did, but nobody does it now. And that's something that I want to make sure comes back is no, like, we can use every part of the animal, and this is a big part of it. I have tried to bead with it a little bit. It's very hard because I think my threads are still a little too thick.
Oh, okay.
So I'm still learning, but it takes I'll just say it takes a really long time to do, but it's very, very satisfying once you actually see this become these.
I know, it's fascinating. Even just to hold the two of them up, it's just quite fascinating to see the difference between one and another. And so I can you just tell me, like, what size beads have you tried to put on through the sinew? Like, are you trying to like put a 15 or something on there, or is it?
Let me see if I can find the piece that I was working with. I don't even know how big these are. This was like the only beading I was able to do.
Oh,
okay.
Like, they're big beads. They're not crow or pony beads or anything like that. They're probably, oh gosh,
like a 9 or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Probably even bigger. Probably a 7 or a 6 or something like that.
Oh, that's so interesting though. So okay,
so we'll see.
But it's interesting though, isn't it? Because it could be for I suppose it depends on how sort of fine you end up getting that sinew, but
well, you also have to think about the history of when sinew disappeared, like when sinew stopped being used. And sinew is great for sewing hides. Like, it is thick. It can go through things that are thick. It's very like tough.
And then it'll stay.
It's supposed to stay. And the way that it's created, it actually gets kind of stuck within the fibers of the hide. So it really makes it hard to like rip it apart. And you have to wet it before you sew with it because it's very stiff. And so when it dries, it gets really stiff.
And then it dries up and it gets tighter too.
Yeah. So that's like, it makes sense in the creation of garments, and it makes sense in using old traditional patterns. Like for us in the north, it was or in Yukon and Alaska and things like that, it was a lot of like porcupine quill designs, right, before beads ever came. And when beads came, so did other materials and supplies like thread.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
those kind of things changed, and beadwork where it is now, there's no way that I'm going to be able to sew or bead like this with sinew. It's not meant for that. It's meant for something else. It's meant to hold and to be strong.
Right. That's great. That's really interesting. And yeah, and it is just as sort of an aside, but it is really fascinating to know how early those materials, those sort of European materials were coming in and then starting to be adapted by beadworkers, fairly early on as well. So, and even because I'm interested in the use of porcupine quills because of a project that I'm doing with Hiawatha, and they were probably using a combination of dyes that were natural dyes, but the commercial dyes were already sort of coming in, and people were starting to use those quite early on. So it's something that's still a mystery as to what in that project what the people were actually using as they were creating those things. So
Yeah. There's one thing that I want to add to
yeah.
that, and it's a conversation that I've had before with non-Indigenous is, they'll say like beads aren't traditional. Like there's that kind of expression of like, beads are something that, came with colonization, and that is true. But I was recently reading Deborah Dockstader's, what is it, bead quill? What is
Bead,
that one called? I
bead
can't
basket,
remember.
bead basket and
Yeah,
quill.
that's right. I was reading that with in Hannah Klaus's class, and that's such a good reminder of beadwork is more than its material. It, like Jobena had said before, it really connects us to our community and to our family. And there's more that the bead represents than just this result of colonization, and a benefit in some ways of having these beautiful blue beads. I'm looking at these ones right here, but the reality is they represent more to us than just a glass bead. They represent our history. They represent our skill as Indigenous beaders and artists. And it's something that we were able to adapt to quickly, when they came. The porcupine quill was something that continues to this day. But the shapes that we were able to create with beads were things that we weren't able to create with quills. Quills are very straight, and everything that you make with it is very straight. But with a bead, because it's round, you can make different designs and things like that. And of course, we were naturally attracted to them. They're beautiful. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really great point, and thank you for bringing that to us. So Jobena, I'd like to talk about the crossover between your work Deliverance, the 3 photographs. You talked about it a little bit at the beginning, and how you sort of did that almost like a performance, but there's a sort of a performative aspect to it that sort of moves from the 3 photographs and the act of actually burying that work, and then so there's that, and then there's the connection between that 3-piece work, the photographs, and the 4 pieces of resilient. No, how can I forget that?
Resilient
Resistance,
repugnance.
resilience.
Oh no,
And
it's resilient repugnance.
rep-
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm
It's
the
a
curator.
very,
I should know this. I'm so
it's a
sorry.
tongue
Yes.
twister. I'm like,
It's the one with the 2 R's.
Yeah.
Yes, the 4 christening dresses that in the spaces that we've exhibited this work before have been. It's like an installation as well. So so it's really, but it's really interesting that the same little dress is one of the 4 that is in the other piece as well. And so I was just sort of wondering if you could talk about, why you wanted to photograph that, and why you wanted that action to happen in with the burial and all of that. Just sort of to if you can add a little bit to sort of go over again what you were told us a little bit of earlier.
Yeah. Well, when I was photographing them, I wasn't actually thinking about displaying them. I just wanted to document them, but then that was kind of like an afterthought, because like I did start by taking pictures of the dresses and thinking about burying the dresses. It reminds people that you must remain resilient no matter what happens to you in life, what happens within the human condition. And in one of the photos, I have a dead bird that I found. And well, I was going to bury the bird anyway, because my mom always taught me to, if you find a dead creature on the ground, you're supposed to bury it. So that's what I was doing. And I thought, well, I saw all the roots when I was digging the little grave for this poor little bird that died on the side of the road. And I thought that really speaks of the life cycle. It's something that was alive, and it was flying, and it was free. And it kind of speaks of colonialism, how what they were trying to do to our people. I thought, well, burying it, it goes back to the earth, but it doesn't. When things die, they don't truly die. They nourish the earth. Anything that goes back to the earth goes into the earth and nourishes the little critters that live in the earth. And I was thinking about the life cycle, and then I thought about the sun. You can always count on the sun setting and rising each day. And even though, like, when I'm speaking of the Christianity and colonialism, we're still living, we're still moving on. And that's the way people should be thinking, rather than focusing on the bad things that happen in their life. So that's what I was trying to show in the photos, and to show in the dresses, is to teach all people, native, non-native, about their history, because it's a part of them and it makes them who they are. And we're resilient because we're still here. I can apply beads to anything, and people say that, oh, that's from the Europeans, but that's true. Yeah, it's from the Europeans, but it's suggesting that we're not capable of evolving, and we're just stuck in our colonial, pre-colonial whatever, and that we're still, but that's not true. And I think using beads really emulates who it represents, our identity as a people. And that's why we should continue to use beads to express ourselves. So that's what that project is about.
Mm-hmm. I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting as well, because, you know, you think about people, the sort of trying to situate in Indigenous art practices as sort of traditional and as contemporary, but both of you are using, you know, what could be considered, and it's always that, it's that terrible word anyway, traditional, because what the heck does that actually even mean? And
Yeah.
and so you know, I'm constantly finding that I'm like constantly searching for what to use instead of that word, and it's because it's, you know, it's there's always that impetus to situate Indigenous people in the past anyway. Even now, it's still, it's not ending, but to be using, you know, beadwork in this really contemporary way that you're both doing it, I just, you know, it's just fascinating to see, and how much, you know, the way that you keep evolving, and the way that you keep changing. Well, evolving, is that a good word? But the way that you keep making new projects and new, you know, you just keep adding to what your practice is just wonderful, and I'm just so pleased to be part of all of this. So I'm so happy, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I just Oh, there was just one question that I wanted to ask you about, Jobena, about you beading the interior of the heels of the moccasins. Tell me about that. Tell us about that. Why is that an aesthetic choice? Is it to sort of, because you've got the narrative you're trying to tell us is so rich?
Mhm.
Why do you do that? And what do you think the implications are?
It's functional and aesthetic and meaningful at the same time, because in our culture, all of our art pieces were functional. You could actually use these art pieces. So I was thinking about when I was living in the north and we were collecting those spruce branches to line the teepee with, and how we're inadvertently helping the Mother Earth to replenish the land by spreading these needles. And I thought, well, at the same time, I know, like, I did it for a fundamental reason too, but it's also symbolic as well, because you hold the land with you. Like, if you were to wear these slippers, you're carrying the land with you, that symbolism. And I thought about how it would be better for me to actually bead something like those spruce branches, or something that looked like kind of like spruce branches, because it's just something that's easier for me. I don't have to transfer branches or steel branches in the city.
We've done that.
That's another story.
That's another story. Yeah.
It's a funny story, but we won't go there.
We'll save that. We'll save that one for the physical show. Well, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And Teresa, did you want to talk a little bit more about the significance of the sinew in relation to the pillows, or do you feel like is there anything more that you'd like to tell us about the pillows and your process? And
yeah, I think for myself, like what I picture with this project, because it's really hard to kind of see just from the images, I think the physical exhibition is going to be different in a lot of ways. And it's funny that Jobena is talking about functionality, because I'm also like making pillows, which is something that's functional, but it's beaded on, so you can't really use it. But I think that's quite interesting, and that's definitely something that comes along with beadwork, is this constant thought that it has to be used, and it has to be something that can be used, but we're presenting work in a very contemporary space, in a gallery, out of context from our communities, and it's different, and it creates it as art. It makes it art instead of craft. And I think, going back to, I just want to quickly go another way and comment on your comment of like tradition and contemporary, and these two separate categories for Indigenous beaders, and Indigenous artists altogether. I feel like we just have to drop both words. Both words, it's just Indigenous art. You know what I mean? Like, I make upper Tanana art. That's it. I bring both my contemporary self and my traditional self into the work. So those two words, like, they shouldn't even be used in describing Indigenous art anymore. We're past that. We're at a completely different stage now. But the sinew, for myself, I feel like I have to describe this, because it needs to be kind of heard of what I'm planning. I'm planning on having, if not 8, even more beaded pillows. And I see them in a space, perhaps in a circle. And what I see in the center of the circle, there might be different items, different things. And one of the predominant things that I want to have in there is the sinew. And, traditionally, women would sit in a circle and be together, and they would get stuff done, while they were sitting there together. And one of them would have been this creation of thread from the backstrap sinew. So I want to kind of allude to the past in that way. But also, once again, this traditional versus contemporary reality is, my mom came to visit me last Thanksgiving, or what I call Turkey Day. And she brought the sinew with her. And we once again had a very like, I don't know, 21st century moment where we called my grandma, put her on speaker, and asked, how do we process the sinew? And so she's telling us through the phone, and my mom and I are sitting there huddled together on my desk, processing the sinew. And so it was that moment of like, yes, this feels very weird and digital in some ways, but at the same time, it felt so powerful because I had my grandma telling us what to do without actually being able to show us. So she had to use her words and she had to describe her process instead of just showing all the time, because that's what she's used to, is just showing. But this time she had to talk it out. And that really made her think, like, what does that mean to create this work, and for her to remember, because she's having memory issues these days. So even having her remember something was quite interesting, because it was a thing that she's always done since she was young. So it's just a natural part of that long-term memory that she can access, is how to process sinew. And like my mom and I sitting there doing it together, well, I'm thinking about, all of these women that would have been in a circle doing it together as well. It's very, it has that connection to the past and to my ancestors. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. And I started with myself, my mom, and my grandma, because that's who I include in my introduction. So Dolchenelna is my name. In the introduction, I also said Sielkai, which is my mom's name, and then Saijitsu, which is my grandma's name. And then I will kind of extend it and go to my great-grandma, my great-great-grandma, and my great-great-great-grandma. That's as far back as we know the names. So I'll do all of those traditional names. And then I might actually expand it to other members of my family as well. And past these 3 generations, the rest of my family are deceased. So I'm trying to think of how to connect my family that's deceased or passed away with my family that's living, and how I might represent those two. Because I also shared that I had lost 2 grandparents in 2020. One of them is my dad's mom, who is non-Indigenous. And then the other one was my grandpa Sid's partner. So she's not my biological grandma, but I considered her my grandma. I also want to include them somehow. So it's really going, like, I really see it as kind of a representation of my family and the women in my family. And that's kind of the connection that I might have with it. So we'll see how far I get or what it might become, but that's the direction I'm thinking of taking it. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you both so much for this today. This has just been really, really wonderful and rich. And I also think it's just a really nice, it's a wonderful object in itself, this digital exhibition that we're living with in the time of a pandemic, but I'm really looking forward to being with both of you in Ngoja Wanong as well in September 2022, and we'll be there together, and we'll all be vaccinated, and we'll be able to see this amazing exhibition, and so it'll be really lovely. So thank you very much today, Miigwech. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. I just want to say also, I'm super proud of being shown alongside Jobena. I think I'm super excited for, the online exhibition, but also I think the physical exhibition is something we've been looking forward to for quite a while. And I'd love to be shown beside you and see how our work complements each other physically and in person, and how that experience would be. But Sinicho, Lori, and Jobena, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you. And I'm so excited for next year, because real is always better. But I guess virtual is where we are right now. Yeah.
It is for the moment. Yes, it
is.
But thank you both so much. Have a good night now.
Okay, good night.
We can see the difference between across the country, because it's getting dark in Montreal and it's still
like
light in Victoria.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the basement, but it's dark. I'm like,
Well, thanks for also pushing it back. I had a meeting booked before, and I was
Oh,
like, I can't do it until 2. So yeah, thanks for having it done now.
yeah.
It's great. It was wonderful. Lovely to see you both as
Yeah.
always. Take
All
care.
right, talk to you
Okay.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.